Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Cover 4 broadcast. My name is Brandon Adams here from DogNation.com. I've got the rest of the team with me as well. Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel. Over the course of the next hour or so, we're looking forward to talking some UGA football with you. A lot of the discussion centering on return to normalcy of sorts as UGA began its voluntary workouts with players back on campus on Monday. And we've seen some glimpses of what's been going on through what Georgia's been willing to share through its video team. The rest of it left to our imaginations. But I think in a lot of ways, Mike Griffith, just the sense that players are back on campus again has provided a little bit of energy for UGA fans hoping for something that feels like a normal season. Just the presence of the players on campus is at least a step in that direction. Wouldn't you agree? We're off to a rip-roaring start.
Great job.
I would absolutely agree with you. I would absolutely agree with you, B. I think there is a sense of normalcy seeing these guys back on campus. And even though we've just kind of seen their welcome back to campus and, boy, they missed one another videos, it feels like the beginning for Georgia. And obviously the goal is a championship season. I think that's the mindset. And it starts here. It starts with these voluntary workouts and whatever other workouts these guys are doing outside the football building.
And, Connor, I think it's important to know that while what we've seen go on this week may seem like a simple step, the truth is if you want to go back to the middle of March, heading towards April, the presence of these players back on campus here at the beginning of the summer, that was far from a given way back then, was it not?
Yeah, I can remember when Kirk Herbstreit said he didn't think there'd be a college football season, and I remember the furor that BA had to sort of rush to debunk that. And you know, ultimately we are still, I think, a long way from a college football season and even knowing what it really looks like. But at the same point in time, I think it's important to recognize that steps are being taken for the season to get underway.
Jeff, I'll bring you into this discussion as a recruiting expert here. Obviously, what's going on at local high schools, and by, I guess, high schools, you can just take it beyond the local area there as well. Many of those are getting back to some voluntary workout stuff there as well. They're still waiting to find out if they're going to be in class together on campus again this upcoming academic year, but at least in some form of preparation, some work is going on. How is what you're seeing from recruits out and about, either with individual coaches or back in their high school facilities again? How is it similar? How is it different from what we're seeing from the big guys back on the college campuses again?
No, we just lost him. Oh, boy.
You got me, Jeff.
Brandon, are you there, man?
There we
Sure
go.
am.
1 for 3. Great.
Hey, man, so sometimes these winds here in Pasadena and the San Gabriel Mountains, they get a little tricky with the signal, man. But I think really it's just different, man. You see guys in open air working out. They're on basically the tracks of around their football stadiums. They're lifting weights that way. You see what they're doing in terms of, you need to have 7 persons per coach. The ratios there, they're bringing guys in and out. They can only go into facilities a certain way. They can only leave facilities a certain way. I think sanitize and masks are basically the play calls of the day for right now. But I think most of these young men are just happy to be back doing it, back to be into this culture. Brandon, we were only like a month or two ago where like head coaches were supervising food runs throughout their community. They were making sure guys got protein shakes, making sure guys got protein powder. So I think these steps where they feel like, there's still a lot left to be desired. I think everybody's just happy to be going through the motions right now.
Yeah, I think that's probably well said, and we'll continue to watch those motions go through. And what we're going to do here is a way of kind of just taking a snapshot of where college football is at the moment, where UGA is at the moment as we get ready to start the upcoming season. I think we're going to look at a few questions here that set us up for an interesting conversation that I think gives us a pretty good preview of what's to come and how far we've traveled as we get ready for the upcoming season. I want to begin with something that Connor Riley has recently written at DogNation.com, and since Connor wrote it, we'll give him a chance to go first. When we look at players back on campus, when the incoming freshmen showing up, veteran players returning, and everything else in between, the players that benefit the most from what's about to happen. Connor, your piece at DogNation.com the other day, I kind of noticed a theme, at least connecting a few of those names together, but just as a way of kind of getting us started off. You mentioned a series of names the other day, but are there one or two, maybe more so than the rest, that you would start us off by saying, hey, these are the players that by being on campus, by getting the accountability that comes from being back around the strength and conditioning staff again, these are the players that benefit from this the most?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the three I'm going to go with are all on offense, just given I think that's where a majority of the questions with this team right now lie. The first, I think, is pretty obviously Jamie Newman. I mean, we're all obviously losers with this whole COVID-19 situation, but in terms of from a football aspect, the guy who lost the most, I think, with the cancellation of spring practice was Newman, just because he's not getting those reps in Todd Monken's offense. And while he's still not able to get sort of face-to-face on the field practice rep instructions from Monken and from Kirby Smart, being in Athens with all his wide receivers, being in Athens with the entire team, I think is going to sort of help continue in his process of getting more comfortable at Georgia, learning the offense a little bit more, and sort of just becoming more and more of what Georgia probably needs him to be in a starting quarterback. Now, he does also have JT Daniels there as a transfer quarterback, and we don't know yet whether or not he'll be eligible, but just from being around teammates and having everyone sort of under the same theoretical roof, I think Daniels is a big winner there. The second guy, there really aren't too many big injury stories for Georgia in this offseason, but the biggest one is pretty obviously Dominic Blaylock. Him being back in Athens around both Scott Sinclair, the strength and conditioning coach, and sort of Ron Corson, the director of sports medicine, having that sort of constant supervision, the ability to be around those guys as he recovers from an ACL injury at Georgia's, I think, biggest positional worry, wide receiver. I think that's a very good, it's something that's going to help him get more prepared. And I think the expectation has long been he'll be ready to go for week one. But now sort of having that and not having to do it away from them and doing it virtually, I think that'll help. And then, I was debating whether to go a guy like Jordan Davis or a guy like Broderick Jones here, but they're sort of the same archetype, and guys who need to reshape their bodies or, either in Jones' case, put on some weight to possibly contribute as a freshman, or in Davis's case, sort of keep his weight in check as a way of, staying as one of the elite players on this Georgia team. But being able to do that in Athens, where you have the weight facilities, you have the food and nutrition specialists, is a lot easier to do in Athens than it is in your hometowns of either Lithonia or Charlotte, North Carolina.
Mike, who would you add to that list from your perspective? Who benefits from being on this campus right now?
Yeah, I like Connor's answers. I'll start with that, BA. I think he's spot on. But the freshmen, obviously, I mean, they've never been through a college camp, the incoming freshmen, guys like Jermaine Burton that maybe you look to make an immediate impact. Dejon Edwards, can he contribute at the running back position? Even the freshmen that came in earlier that haven't been through a full year, they're still getting used to a routine. I guess I'd say this is anything but routine, but being around the new teammates, having an opportunity to prove themselves. And I would go beyond just Jamie Newman. I'd say all the quarterbacks, the passing game in general, because I have a suspicion now. I can't prove it, but above and beyond the individual voluntary workouts, lifting weights and working out, I got a feeling these guys are playing pitch and catch somewhere, maybe off campus on their own time. So I think the passing game benefits, as well as the incoming freshmen, even the returning freshmen that enrolled early.
Jeff, you got a thought on this topic there as well? Who would you add to this list of the guys that have a chance to thrive, either because of what they're doing to their body physically, or as Mike said, maybe developing some chemistry with each other away from these workouts? Who would you add to this list?
Yeah, it's funny. I heard a lot of opinion. I sift through right there. I don't know if I would call the most in need of development position. I think that's a toss-up between the wide receiver spot and the offensive line spot, because regardless of what you're doing, you really only have two mainstays that are coming back to their familiar positions at Georgia, and that would be Trey Hill and Ben Cleveland. Now, you can say Justin Schaefer, he's coming back off of a neck injury. You can also say that he started a little bit last year and got great reps against Tennessee and Notre Dame prior to the neck injury, and he's one of the most mature physical guys there. But I guess I'm just so boisterous, Brandon, on the wide receiver position, where that's a position where you can come in and you can make some plays fairly easily, as long as what we saw last year from George Pickens and Dominic Blaylock to varying degrees, especially when Georgia really didn't start putting the offense in their hands and feeding those guys until maybe to the midpoint of the season. Reminder, folks, neither one of those guys were early enrollees either. George Pickens wasn't an early enrollee. Neither was Dominic Blaylock. I think the early camp storylines I'm hearing from a lot of fans is they start looking, Brandon, and they start sifting through those pictures and sifting through those stations and welcome back to the building type photos. And they're looking for George Pickens. They're looking for Richard LeCount. They're looking for guys that okay, let me make sure all those guys are still on campus. I'm getting messages left and right from fans that are wondering, why haven't we seen George Pickens socially on Athens yet? what's going on with, more Jamie Newman, more Carson Beck, more Dwan Mathis. I think it's that type of season for everyone where they're looking at these new faces and old faces and making sure they're safe and okay. And, man, I guess one footnote, Brandon, if anybody had money on news coming out of Alabama about positive COVID-19 tests and news not coming out of Georgia about positive coronavirus tests, I think most of us probably would have expected that Alabama would have been just as locked down as Georgia.
Yeah, so we have heard more about that and what we've heard going on at UGA. And as far as like some of these videos of the players that Georgia shared, I think one of the challenges I kind of find myself in right now is once the guys put on the mask and have half their face covered up, it's a lot more difficult for me to sort of tell who is who. I'll admit that half the challenge for me when Georgia shares these videos, and I'm slowing these things down on a frame-by-frame basis, I'm trying to see what I can see. But I am not necessarily an expert, Connor, when it comes to identifying the faces when half the face is covered up with the mask. I guess we're all going to have to get a little bit more used to that as we head towards the upcoming season because we're going to be seeing a lot more of these masks, it would seem.
Yeah, some guys, like the Eric Stokeses of the world, they're because of just their vibrant personality, it's easy to tell and see who that is. But some of them, you're staring at them for a few seconds. Maybe they got a new off-season haircut, and you're just trying to put the pieces together and see who it is. And it is, to you point out, a little bit more challenging, but I think I'm starting to get to the point where the names and faces that are coming up, I'm starting to recognize them a little bit more.
Let me add one more point to this conversation. We're going to shift gears and talk about something different. For me, Jeff mentioned the role that freshmen play this time of year, these summer workouts. One of the things we briefly talked about on Dog Nation Daily this week, too, is for the guys, a Kendall Milton, the Justin Robinson, the rest of those names that had a chance to be a part of the early enrollee stuff, and in Robinson's case, even kind of go through some of the bowl practice, things like that. Some of the other players got a chance to do that too. The fact that they're not overwhelmed by what they're seeing in June right now. This is not practice, not the same thing as that. We've heard, especially Jeff, I can think of interviews that you and I have done together with some of these recruits over the years where they almost always all talk about getting lost on campus when they first show up, not knowing how to take the bus, and whatever other rite of passage you have when you first become on campus at UGA. That orientation, acclimation period for the guys who've been early enrollees over with. They didn't get the spring practice they thought they were going to get. They didn't get their chance to have G-Day inside Sanford Stadium. But in terms of accelerating a process that could lead to them being contributors in their first year on campus, the fact that they've been a part of this college environment, predating the coronavirus, going back into the wintertime, December, January, heading into February, I still think that matters, even if the rest of the spring didn't turn out to be the way they thought it would be.
You want to take this first? Me, Griff, Jeff?
Anybody, just anybody who wants to.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of valid points there in that, obviously we don't know yet what school is going to look like this fall due to COVID-19. But as you point out, the academic side of this, I don't think for those guys that enrolled early, there is going to be that same adjustment. Whereas, if it is online, maybe that is a little bit easier for these or for these mid-year enrollee players. But, Kendall Milton's not going to have an issue, figuring out don't get on family housing, his first week in August if school is back to normal. And again, we just don't know what that's going to be like. But there is, I think, even without the benefit of spring practice, there is still a value in those guys getting on campus early.
All right, let me shift gears and talk about something else for a moment. Mike, you had some reporting this week, dognation.com, some of the options that UGA is sifting through in terms of what the stadium policy will look like this upcoming season. Really a wide range of possibilities from extreme social distancing, maybe even the absence of fans, to the possibility we may see a full stadium. Before we get into some of this and what we think may occur, give me a little bit of a summary of what UGA released this week.
Yeah, well, it was a 225-page release. Remember, earlier this spring, President Moorhead said he was going to put together 9 committees. I think they split up about 142 people, to kind of go over the resocialization plan for the University of Georgia. One of those was headed up by Greg McGarity, the athletics portion. I believe that was about 21 or 22 pages worth, not just the policies of how the guys come back, and Kirby kind of touched on that a week ago, but also the 3 distinct plans, as you mentioned, BA. Nobody but mandatory personnel in the stadium, or limited attendance was number 2, and then full attendance was number 3. So kind of what you said, a pretty wide spectrum. The thing that I saw that was constant, though, was a lot of cashless enterprise. So in other words, you're not going to be handing your ticket necessarily to the ticket taker. You're going to scan it yourself. the people working the concession stands, gloves and masks, and the decals on the sidewalk leading into the stadium entrances, as well as the concourses and the bathroom, 6 feet apart spacing, the things that you would expect. The seating arrangements, McGarity said anything from 2 to 4 to 5 to 6, and I called him after I read all this. I said, Greg, what do I take from this? He said, really, it's fluid. We had to turn in a plan, and so this is what it says. But, as you know, BA, the bottom line is we're going to see where we're at in August, and they're going to draw a plan from where COVID-19 is then.
Jeff, you had something you wanted to add to this?
I feel like Jeff is like the guy in the last row, and the teacher says, Mr. Centel, do you have something to say? Is Jeff passing notes again during my speech, BA?
Smooth as butter all today. Go ahead, Jeff.
I think the thing that, as we're going over this, and Mike, I applaud you, man, for going through all 225 pages of those, man. I can just imagine you with burning the midnight oil with your banker's lamp and everything else like that. But, one thing I wanted to think about, kind of just riffing off what we're seeing, is I don't know if you can win June or you can win the early social media photo leaks, but folks, did you guys catch what Zamir White looked like in that running back photo picture?
Sure.
I mean, I don't know why someone would have ever named him after a Greek god about 4 or 5 years ago, because he definitely looks the part now. And it almost balanced out the thing where you saw a Georgia running back room and you didn't see a DeAndre Swift or a Sony Michel or a Todd Gurley or a Nick Chubb. And it was kind of okay because you saw young Milton in the front row. You saw Cook flanking him on the other side of the couch. And then you saw Zamir there in the back, along with Kenny McIntosh as well. I don't know, of all the images that Georgia's leaked out so far, you saw the receivers pick where everybody saw how big Justin Robinson looks and Marcus Rosemy looks, especially next to their coach, Cortez Hankton. But I think to me that running back photo was one of those, hope brings eternal, hope springs forth just by seeing those guys at Dell McGee's house. And it's funny, most might know that Dell McGee's son is a budding college football prospect in his own right. I think he's an 8th grader. And you saw him sitting with some of those folks on the couch. And I had some people in the Dog Nation forum ask me, who's that kid there in the front off to the left? And anytime you got guys wondering if that's a Georgia football player when you're in the 8th and 9th grade, that's a good sign.
Yeah, no doubt about that. If you want to go see more of that, Del McGee's Twitter feed has that. We also showed that to you on Dog Nation Daily here this morning. That's pretty fun to think about. And then, Jeff, on the topic that Mike was just addressing in terms of, just the wide variety of options that we may see for this upcoming season in terms of fans in the stadium. And really, for the fans who attend the games, this is fast approaching one of the most important questions of all. Am I going to be allowed to go? Am I going to have my friends that I'm used to seeing? Frankly, if it's socially distant rules in place, that probably is going to up in the tailgating there as well on the basis of the report that I read. Do you have a sense yet, Jeff, for kind of what you think this might look like? It's all conjecture at this point in time, but this is what we do for a living. Do you have a sense of where all of this is going at the moment?
A tough answer. I don't know if he does have a sense or if he's just muted himself.
Yeah. Connor, how about you? Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah. Again, I think as Mike pointed out, it's all sort of very fluid, and unfortunately, we're just until we know more about this disease and sort of where we stand with it in August. I don't really know if we're going to know if there are going to be tailgaters on campus this fall. I don't know if there are going to be, a full stand. Or full stadium, full stands. I will say, I think that you look at that Georgia's early season schedule, and you talked about this on your show this morning. Maybe there is a little bit of an advantage for Georgia of going to an empty Bryant-Denny stadium as opposed to a stadium that has 100,000 people in it, including President Trump. They're cheering loudly. So I think in that aspect, again, as Mike has understated time and time again, there's just so much we don't know right now, and to sort of have an idea of where we're going to be in August is just to sort of, I think, a guessing game as back in like March and April where we would have theoretically been in June.
The only thing I'll say about that, though, Mike, is the guess that I'm willing to make now is a little more optimistic than the guess I would have made a month or so ago. There's a chance that I'm wrong, but I'm a lot more confident saying there are more fans as opposed to fewer. For instance, take the state of Texas as a for instance, where the governor, Greg Abbott, has opened the door for 50% capacity. Hard for me to imagine the other SEC states would allow a state like Texas to, outpace them in terms of bringing fans back and returning the sense of normalcy. Now, whether that's the right thing to do for the health of the country, I'm not really qualified to talk about that one way or another. But in terms of what I could see unfolding, if one SEC state's being aggressive in one regard, for me, it becomes hard to imagine the other states wouldn't try to at least match that to the extent they have the capability to do that. Where do you come down on that?
Yeah,
well, summarizing what you just said, not sure if it's good for the country, but by gosh, it's football. And SEC is not going to fall behind the state of Texas or A&M. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it's a football match. It's a part of the culture here. And I do think that, Greg Sankey and the SEC, they're trying to be thorough. They got the best doctors in the world. But when push comes to shove, BA, I'm with you and I'm with Connor. I do think we're going to see fans right now. My guess, pure speculative guess, and I'm assuming that COVID-19 stays flat, is going to be the 50% model. Now, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, it's interesting. I said to Greg McGarity, I think I brought it up on this program, and one of those things where your top of your head blows off when you think about it. Well, my gosh, they're playing indoors. Well, you just open the roof. That's right. They've got a retractable opening roof. Now, same with Jerry World. So this is important because not all these indoor stadiums do. I don't know what Syracuse is going to do. We'll have to ask PJ about that, Connor.
Yeah, and to the point BA was making about, Texas, I think what you've seen with the reopening of states, not that I am a political expert, though I did pass AP government in high school, shout out back there, by the way, a Georgia fan. We're sort of looking at this isn't being taken as sort of a federal reopening, a federal response. It is being left up to a state by state, and I think in a larger sense, a region by region basis in terms of opening things up. And to this point, I think we've seen the southern states, the SEC states, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Texas. Texas isn't really SEC state. They've been a little bit more aggressive in their sort of reopening plans as opposed to, say, states like New York, New Jersey, and California. So I do think, for conference-wide, it'll probably perhaps be a little bit more of a fair playing ground than sort of it would have theoretically been on a national level.
Jeff, what do you think about this?
Mike, can you do a Jeff impression?
Well, Jeff, you with me? What do you think about this?
Guys.
Yeah, I think, guys.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Mike, please, let's continue that. I want to hear at least a minute of Jeff by Mike.
No, that's all I got is guys. I can't possibly come up with some of these responses that you're the creative philosopher. See, look, there's the hand on he's mulling the eye, he's pondering now. This is good.
I mean, really, I think, and that was a nice animated response to Brandon's. I think it seems to me like without any conjecture, it looks like we're talking about what's good for football, what's good for SEC football, and what's good for the business models and bottom lines of starting football back up. I think you saw like, some people were, I don't know how much of that came in my last answer, but, some people were worried about the relish, that they couldn't put the relish station on their hot dogs. I think anybody that sits there and goes, I think it goes back to what McGarity told our Mike Griffith, told Mike, is basically he said, you know what? All this is really fluid, but it's just documentation we've got to have in advance before everybody audibles off.
Yeah, I don't know, Connor, the relish on the hot dog, or is it the ketchup and the mustard on the hamburger? I'm not sure where he was going with the analogy, but the relish on the hot dog was pretty good, B. I don't know if I could top that one.
That's an actual comment that I saw. I forgot who made it. I don't know if it was on BA's show, but they're like, I draw the line of not being able to put relish on my hot dog.
Yeah, but listen, I'm going to defend the fans here a little bit on this. When you've gone to games a certain kind of way for the entirety of your life, to be asked to do things different in a year like this, or to even be not invited to be in the stadium, which is certainly a possibility for a good number of fans, listen, should you say it's not the end of the world? It's obviously not the end of the world, and the changes would be coming for obviously a very good reason, a global pandemic. But I am, Jeff, sympathetic to the fans who are a little bummed out that their experience, whether it be going to the concession stand or being a part of a tailgate or whatever it is they're used to doing. I'm sympathetic to the message from fans who say, you know what? I'm kind of disappointed that as it stands right now, a good bit of what I'm used to experiencing as a fan might not be the way that I'm used to. I'm sympathetic to that message. I don't mind telling you that. Jeff?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can now.
We should play a game every time. I know you people are. I know everybody's wondering, and we apologize. I apologize for what's going on here, but every time I'm trying to speak, I get a flash across my screen that says the host has muted everyone every time.
But
all right. Well, we'll let you figure that out. For Connor and Mike here for a moment. So here's a prediction I'm willing to make. And listen, I get predictions wrong all the time, so this one just being added to the list won't be that big of a deal.
I don't know where that cough came from.
I do believe that Georgia. First of all, I'm not taking the L on saying bad things about Jalen Hurts but be that as it may. I do believe by the end of the year, I don't know when. Maybe it happens as Connor has suggested against Alabama, or maybe some of the time during the season. I do believe that Georgia plays in a full stadium at some point this year, either Sanford Stadium on the road, college football playoff, whatever else. I believe that happens. Connor, I know you do because I think you've said you think it'll be full against Alabama. Do you still feel that way September the 19th against the Tide?
So my own personal feelings is that, no, it probably shouldn't be full by then until at least I think we have a better sort of handle, maybe possible antibody treatments or, a vaccine, though obviously the vaccine will come later on. But sort of seeing how sort of states have handled this to this point, I'd probably put it, 55-45 that it is a full stand there. And I think there might be some outside pressure to sort of have a sport like college football, especially in the SEC in the South. I think there might be some pressure to be there. Is it right? That's not a question that I can really answer, but I would not be surprised if there are 100,000 people in Bryant-Denny Stadium when Georgia plays Alabama on September 19th.
Mike, I'm not as comfortable saying when it's going to occur, but I do believe eventually it will. Do you think that Georgia will play at some point in this year in front of a full stadium?
I'm with Connor on this one. He didn't want to come right out and say it, but Nick Saban will pick up the phone and call the governor and say there will be a full stadium when Georgia comes to Bryant-Denny. I mean, you talk about political power. They've got laws written into the state of Alabama that benefit football. I mean, that's no joke. I mean, the judges all went to University of Alabama. I mean, I can't imagine, unless COVID-19 spikes, I can't imagine that Alabama doesn't have a full stadium for Georgia on September 9th. Yes, Michael Carvel is asking me laws, specifically the laws as far as the disclosure of public information and how long of a period before the media can obtain them. Do you realize that the Birmingham News once filed a FOIA and it took 1.5 to 2 years for them to, and Jeff might have even been at AL.com when this happened. It took more than a year or two for them to find out what the violations were under Nick Saban because of the law that they'd written in terms of the sunshine laws and the ability to obtain public information. So I do believe the state of Alabama will be open for full attendance by September 19th.
Jeff, how about you? Do you think Georgia plays in front of a full stadium at some point in time this year? And I guess since we've got two people saying this now, do you think it's September 19 versus Alabama?
Yeah, that's one thing I'm not quite sure. That's one thing I'm not quite sure about yet, the Alabama game. And if it's a full stadium, does that mean everybody has a full stadium with masks on? Because I think that might be what have to happen. If you
listen, I've seen a lot of Alabama fans. A mask might be an improvement for a lot of them.
Yeah, layups like that.
Yeah, I figured he would use that material for the Florida game or something like that. Not exactly for the Alabama game. So with me, you sit there and you go, is it going to eventually happen? I think it will, but I just think that mask situation is you have to see first. Maybe there'll be some historic 2020 photos like those 1919 photos we've seen at Bobby Dodd Stadium and Grant Field, how everybody was, wearing their masks for things like that. I think the bigger question for me, like as we're roaming through this panel and we're trying to make sure whether or not Jeff is going to be muted or unmuted on each one of these topics. let me just throw one into the briar patch here so we can all waller around in it. And that is 89 minus 4 equals 85. I think that's what the biggest thing people are going to wonder about with this Georgia football team over the next 2 months.
Well, we'll get into the scholarship stuff here in a minute. We can certainly do that. Let me finish one more point on this topic, and then we'll kind of move on and kind of deal with some of that as we move forward. Connor, you briefly alluded to this a moment ago, and I think it's an interesting one. The announcement for when we find out, let's say that we do start adding attendance over the course of the year, the announcement for when that takes place could be really fun. As we said on Dog Nation Daily today, the notion that Georgia doesn't really need a full Sanford Stadium until October when Auburn comes in. Can you imagine if it's been socially distanced college football for a few weeks, and yet just before the Auburn game, the hammer comes down and you could have 93,000 people? And let's say Georgia gets the benefit of that, whereas Alabama did not get the benefit of that for Bryant-Denny in September. As frustrating as it'll be for the fans who've missed out on some travel and missed out on some fun, the very different kind of fun of getting a chance to say, hey, everybody can come in between the hedges of the Auburn game or whatever game something like that would take place for. I think that sets up a pretty fun storyline if that indeed does go down.
If that's the case, and let me draw out a scenario for you, I hope every Georgia fan is able to find a fax machine, just write, we're back, print out that fax, and then bring that to the game and hold it up in the stands. It's sort of an allusion to
Michael Jordan, sure.
Michael Jordan, yeah, but I think that'll be an interesting thing over the course of the season, and I would not be surprised in the slightest to see some teams, I think, sort of race back to welcome back their fans if we sort of get a better understanding of how we can contain COVID-19.
All right, so the Cover 4 broadcast.
Hey, Connor, I guess you got to remember how many people are going to know what a fax machine is. Remember that? Everybody's going to –
People know there's this whole misconception that people my age don't know what a fax machine is. We know what faxes are. No one just knows how to use them, but they know they exist.
I mean, listen, it wasn't that long ago. The fax machine was the central figure in National Signing Day.
Yeah.
So young college football fans especially kind of know what fax machines are. Yes, from that standpoint. It's the Cover 4 broad. Go ahead, Jeff.
I guess so with me, and that wasn't the win whipping, but I guess with me, when you go through all those layers of stadium, will they, won't they, how many, I just want to know how loud folks are going to be. Because remember, if anybody's been in a stadium in an SEC cathedral, the noise factor comes with jumping up and down after a big play, with maybe high-fiving your neighbor, a total stranger, trying not to knock over those beverage cups or whatever. I just wonder what the SEC fan base will be like that if they somehow shoehorn 93,000 or 93,000 into Sanford, where everybody's like, now y'all play nice now and not get too close. I just wonder what that'll feel like in an SEC venue with everybody trying to respect those boundaries.
Well, if it's 93,000 people in any stadium, there's no more social distancing because the stadiums themselves aren't big enough to house it that way. I mean, there are concourses in Sanford Stadium where you can't even be 6 inches apart, much less 6 feet apart. But the point about crowd noise, I think, is a good one. Mike, this isn't scientifically based, but I believe it's true nonetheless. If we're talking about the very smallest number of fans, we've heard kicked around the notion of 15 or 20,000, which would be like the smallest number I've seen put out there. I don't think that's enough fans to make noise. But if it's 50,000 fans in a 100,000 seat stadium, which has obviously been what's been talked about for Kyle Field there in College Station, I do think 50,000 is loud enough to create a home field advantage. In fact, there are a lot of stadiums that don't seat more than 50,000 people anyway. So I think Jeff's point's a good one. How many fans does it take for a true home field advantage? 15 or 20,000 may be too small to make enough noise, but 50,000, I think that's enough to be loud on defense. Jeff, you've got your hand in the air. I'll let you talk about it too.
Yeah, I think, and I just thought of this, Brandon, and this is good problems to kind of sort through our brain capacity, but is there going to just imagine a dog walk, Brandon? That probably won't happen even if we're playing football games. There's no way folks can socially distance there. Do you want the players in front of strangers and giving them high fives? I think that would be a casualty as well when we're talking about normalcy and return to tradition.
Could be. Mike, how about the notion of how many fans does it take for a home field advantage?
Yeah, I was going to say, BA, Austin Stadium holds 54,000. Now they have the configuration with kind of a roof where the sound reverberates off of the overhang. And I also think they pipe in music illegally. I'm not so sure that we're going to see piped in music, but hopefully at least the band will be there. Although I guess the band would have to be socially distanced also. I think 50. I'm with you, BA. I think 50,000 can make enough noise. If the team's doing well and in certain circumstances, open air stadium, it's kind of difficult anyway. But the people closest to the field are the ones making the noise. So I would concur with you. I think a 50% stadium plan could produce enough noise to make an impact.
All right, a couple things here real quick, and then we'll change the subject. Christopher White, watching on Facebook, says, if it's only 50,000 fans, how many for the opposing team? I essentially think that if there's any kind of social distance in place whatsoever, there are very few tickets made available to the opposition. As it stands right now, it's somewhere between, 6,000 and 8,000 for most of these SEC teams on the road. Away tickets have become less popular over the last couple of years anyway for most teams in college football. I don't think we'll see much of that. I think if it's a social distance situation, we may not see the Redcoats in the stadium because they are considered, ticketed patrons themselves, even though they're there in an official capacity. So if we're talking about a smaller number of people in the stadium, I don't think we see much in the way of cheerleaders. I don't think we see much in the way of band. I don't think we see much in the way of opposing fans. There will be a lot about the stadium experience different if you're not full bore on terms of who you're allowing in there, I believe. All right. So
Brandon,
all right.
Brandon, I'm trying to follow the pauses, man. One thing I can add to this, and, I didn't want to jump into Mike's point, but, in my career, I've actually been inside Bryant-Denny Stadium for a high school state championship game. And that's a venue that would hold normally 90,000, 100,000. And then for one community, it was Opelika when they were playing Hoover High. And basically everybody in Opelika left the light on and went to that game. And they put 45,000 people when you combine the Hoover fans and maybe the Opelika high school fans into Bryant-Denny Stadium. The acoustics in the venue just weren't there. When you have that many people in an area where you're supposed to have 100,000 on both sides and kind of careening down for that Coliseum effect, it's just simply not the same.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Jeff. It's the Cover 4 broadcast. That's Jeff Sentell, along with Mike Griffith, Connor Riley. My name is Brandon Adams. Good to have you with us. Continuing to take your thoughts on the Georgia Bulldogs on both Facebook and YouTube. We'll read more of your comments. We'll also share some of our issues as well as we look at some of the key questions facing UGA as it's back to work here right now. And Jeff, let's move on to the next one. You brought this a moment ago. As it stands right now, Georgia, by my counts, are 89 scholarships. Obviously, you only have 85 at some point in time. Georgia's going to get down to that 85 number. As we start to look at some of the things that are going to occur as we head through the rest of the summer, what's your expected timeline for when Georgia does kind of announce who's currently thought to be on the team that's not going to be on the team to get down to the 85 scholarships?
Yeah, I've kind of thought about the way this is going to go. And man, I don't know whether these workouts in June and July will be like mini springs where players can kind of get the hint about where they might not be on the depth chart. I think it would be simply a way for Georgia. I don't see Georgia announcing anything. I see these players via their Twitter accounts announcing that they're moving on. Kind of like that Shadarius Townsend tweet from Alabama that caught some eyes over the last week, and those Scott Cochran references and influences to that. But somehow a lot of these players who would have benefited from the cold, hard reality of spring practice about where they sit and where they stand, that's got to happen through these workouts. That's got to happen through the acclimation period when it finally begins. And, I think one of the things that really is on my mind when we start thinking about right now, what should a Georgia fan be thinking is, one of the contexts I got from a lot of these freshmen is they feel like, the coronavirus was tough and it was hard to manage, but it kind of levels the playing field for them to come in and try to learn the position in front of a guy that, doesn't have a lot of experience or simply Zoom installs with the Todd Monken offense. I think it opens up the door, maybe a size 13 or a size 14 more for them to come in and really contend for playing time because, let's say a redshirt freshman receiver or a redshirt freshman offensive lineman, they don't have a lot of experience with Matt Luke aside from the bowl game in that preparation on top of these guys. So I think that advantage has been nullified a lot.
Let me ask you this, Jeff. You mentioned Townsend, the receiver from Alabama, who, if I'm correct in saying, is a grad transfer with 2 years of eligibility remaining. The kind of guy, because he has a connection to Scott Cochran, you might think in some situations Georgia might be interested in. But because the scholarship numbers are where they are right now, my assumption is Georgia's not in that business for anybody else anymore, right? You brought in JT Daniels, you brought in, prior to this, Trey McKitty, guys like that. But just given the glut of players for the spots available, Georgia's day of being able to consider any more players, at this point in time, that ship's pretty much sailed, has it not?
it was almost like you think of like I remember sometimes with budgeting with my parents or grandparents growing up, you rob from Peter to pay Paul. I mean, everybody was kind of looking at JT Daniels like, okay, where is Kirby Smart going to look through the cushions of the couch to find a scholarship for that guy, even if he is 5-star national championship type quarterback ability and talent level. And then you start.
I think Jeff froze up on us. Mike, why don't you jump in here on this topic of, not necessarily specific dates, but things on the horizon as we head towards the summer that you're paying attention to, both in terms of how Georgia is impacted competitively and I guess signs that the train's still rolling down the tracks in terms of getting the season started on time there as well. What's on your mind in that regard?
Yeah, BA, earlier this week, and I believe it may be approved today, the NCAA Oversight Committee introduced a 4-phase plan for a return to the start of practice in August. And, I'm kind of trying to wrap my brain around session 2 and session 3. It comes down to countable activity, and countable activity is a key phrase because that essentially is when the playing field is level. Obviously, different teams have come back to their workouts at different times. Not everybody came back on June 8th. Nebraska was back June 1st. There's schools, I believe Ohio State's coming back. I think Ohio State was June 8th. There's some schools June 15th. Oklahoma, I want to say, is July 1st. But yet still, there's going to be a summer access that is required. The voluntary period will expire mid-July, and then there will be a required summer access. And I wonder if that is when Kirby Smart and his staff will be back in front of the players. That's mid-July. I think that's going to be key when Kirby Smart and the staff can actually lay eyes on the players, observe workouts, lead team meetings, film sessions, and then they're going to get into like a walkthrough period, about a 2-week walkthrough period before they go into the acclimation period, which is the first 5 days of fall camp without pads.
Connor, how about you? What's on your mind in this regard as we head, deeper into the summer? What are you looking at?
Yeah, the whole how does Georgia get down to 85? I think probably mid-August. By that point, you'll probably have a better idea of where guys sort of start to stand on the depth chart. Obviously, the acclimation period, those first 5 days, you're probably not going to glean a whole lot from that. But, as people who follow us, those spring or those fall scrimmages in August play, I think, a really big role in sort of identifying who's shaping out to do what for the coming season. And I think that first scrimmage, whenever that ends up happening, I think is going to play a really significant role sort of in letting guys know which way the wind is blowing. So, unfortunately, it is. I mean, this is just sort of the world Georgia lives in, and Georgia's not the only one that sort of has this bloated roster at the moment. There are other programs out there that are going to have to try and find a way to get down to 85. But, this is just an adjustment, and it's a time where, we all sort of have to make adjustments. I think Kirby Smart has come out and said before in one of his recent Zoom meetings that guys just, you're going to face, and this is clearly everyone is facing adversity right now, and the teams that sort of are best able to react to this and handle this in the best manner, I think are the ones that are going to be best positioned to handle the upcoming 2020 season.
Would you agree with me when it comes to the scholarship situation? There's a chance that Georgia's already down to 85 scholarships. We just don't officially know that yet. To my knowledge, there is no official list of the 85 players are on scholarship, or in Georgia's case, what's thought to be 89. The fact of the matter is a few players could have already made decisions to move on, and we're just not aware of that. And as Jeff alluded to a moment ago, we may never be officially aware of that because a lot of the times these things aren't officially proclaimed.
Right. Now, there are guys that are medical disqualifications. They might not feel comfortable announcing that at this point in time. So, would it surprise me if Georgia's already down to 85? No, not at all. So, again, this stuff, I do think it's all going to play out, and we're not going to be burning the midnight oil on September 6th trying to figure out, all right, well, who is Georgia not going to have on the roster? Is that way they're allowed to play against Virginia?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Jeff, one more date that's kind of on my mind here. Currently, the NCAA mandated dead period for recruiting, I believe, goes through July 31st, and it could be extended beyond that in terms of being able to host visitors on campus. Do you get a sense for how that might change as we get towards the end of July? Are coaches ready for that to come to an end, or do they want to stay focused on getting their team ready for the upcoming season? What's the sense of what coaches want to happen with visits, and do you get any kind of sense about when we may start seeing visitors back on campus at UGA again?
Yeah, that's let me talk about a known. first of all, right now, you know that they're going to look at the playing field and try to determine nationally, socially, whatever. They're going to look at what sounds right and feels right for July 31st. My personal opinion, from kind of leaving my ear to the ground on a lot of things, is you're going to see resistance on both sides. Okay. You're going to see resistance from the high school coaches in August. Let's say they allow them to go back in August. Well, that's fall camp time. That's normally when a lot of these high school coaches, they've let their players visit all summer long, and now that's the focus on the season ahead. The other thing from the college coach's perspective is, Brandon, when it's full go August 6th and everybody's trying to figure out install real fast, there's not going to be a whole lot of time for, let's make sure this 5-star feels catered to the entire time on his official visit or unofficial visit. I think the other things I always heard preliminary with, what could have been the mock-up or template for visits this summer when they were allowed, if they were going to be allowed, is they would only bring in, like, the running backs would have to stay together. There would be a small number of that. You wouldn't have mingling between a lot of players together. Everybody remembers what Georgia's done recently with scavenger hunts, or the basically the cookout last year with the slip and slide and everything else. Going to be very limited. There's going to be guys watching and making sure a lot of things are being followed. I don't know, Brandon. Honestly, if I had to, venture and throw a small gentleman's wager on that, I don't know if we'll really see recruiting until the high school seasons and the fall seasons are underway, until like late August, something like that. Because I think there's a lot of hay that needs to get in the barn on the high school level and the college level that everybody will be basically working triple time in order to get that stuff done, to feel good about where their programs are at in late July, mid-July, and mid-August.
I realize you can't speak for the families of every recruit that's out there, but I am curious to your opinion nonetheless. If I waved a magic wand right now and said the dead period is lifted, recruiting for this weekend can take place, do you feel like most parents of Georgia recruiting targets would be comfortable being on the road this weekend? Or do you think there's reluctance on the part of the parents about having their kids away from home and being out and about again, kind of participating in his life as we knew it prior to the coronavirus? How do you think the parents of recruits feel about this right now?
I think the first thing you'd think about is the parents and finances, with a lot of their household incomes each Friday paycheck being hit by coronavirus. And that means no short-term air travel. That means they're not going to take a long plane flight without a 14 days lead up. The other thing, I think, if the NCAA gave a NASCAR style wave of the checkered flag or wave of the green flag to say everybody get back in recruiting again, I think you'd see a lot of the local schools, the in-state schools, the nearby schools really reap the benefits of that immediately. I think that they'd be willing to go and check a lot of things out. It would just be the college's perspective in terms of, hey, we're just happy getting our players back here and acclimating. We don't want any setbacks. So we don't only want to add a couple of more new little differences or new little intrigue to the chemistry right there in terms of, the college ecosystems and bringing a lot of people in. I just wonder, folks, I know everybody thinks about the way it used to be. It's not going to be that way for this 2021 cycle. I think in some parts of the world, people might say, you know what, why don't we just gear up and start recruiting again on September the 6th, September the 1st, and then let's make sure we get our seasons on track first before we start adding in our recruiting chases and our races for the time being.
Jeff, I want to come back to you in a moment on a recruiting-related question. Before that, Connor, I thought Mike Anderson had an interesting point in our Facebook comment section. Because of the uncertainty right now, the fact that we're not taking visits, or recruits won't be taking visits for some time to come, could you foresee a scenario where the February signing day is more in vogue again this year, whereas since the early signing period began, December's been the date? Could you see a little bit more weight thrown back in the direction of February, just given how delayed everything's going to be right now, and the fact that national analysts have been predicting a big wave of decommitments at some point?
Potentially. I just think it comes down to when we're sort of able to restart the visit process and allow that. If that is late August, September, probably not. But if it does push even further back to November, and guys really aren't even getting a chance to visit, 2 or 3 schools at that, I definitely think you're going to see a lot of guys potentially sort of wait and wait until that February deadline to make an announcement. I think the interesting thing is, over the years, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but we are starting to see more and more early enrollees. And the lack of visits and the guys who are at this moment unsure but still want to get to college early, I think, those are the guys that are impacted most by this, and the chance that they're not getting to see all the schools that they want to, and they're going to, if they're going to want to get to college early and sort of reap some of those benefits, they're going to have to make some sacrifices and no longer consider schools that they were going to.
All right, we're going to finish up in a moment with a fun look at some of Georgia's top competition in the SEC. Before we do that, Jeff, on the topic of recruiting, are the Dogs on commitment watch this weekend? Romello Brinson, the 4-star wide receiver from Miami, slated to announce Georgia's among his finalists. Some UGA fans on Twitter and other social media platforms seem to think Georgia might be a player here. How much ear to the ground, paying attention for the Brinson commitment should be ongoing for UGA fans?
I think the thing that's going on there with Mr. Brinson is I think he's kind of that guy type recruit at the moment. I think the bigger commitment watches that everybody should remember are kind of some of those long-standing targets. When you think about guys like Smile Munden Jr., perhaps a guy like Terrence Ferguson as well. I think those are the guys, and I know there's some chatter about, is it Miami? It used to be Texas A&M. Brinson took a late visit. I think it was early March to Georgia to check out Georgia, like in that period when Dylan Fairchild got a chance to visit Georgia really good for the first time too. I think with Brinson, he's a guy that I just look at that whole wide receiver position right now, and you wonder, this is kind of what I said on Hedges, is I wonder what can Georgia add after I think they signed a prolific class of wide receivers in 2020. I think it'll go down as the greatest haul of receivers in 2020. So what's different? What do they need? If you're looking on the, you're trying to fill up the grocery basket with what the pantry needs, I think it's more speed receivers. It's more guys like Malcolm Jet Johnson. I think those are the immediate needs for wide receiver. And, a lot of people that could sit there and say, I know exactly what the wide receiver board is for Georgia or what the wide receiver board should be for Georgia. I think you're going to have some misses for that. When you look at, let's face it, guys. I remember two months ago, everybody thought Deion Colzie was going to be the guy. Deion Colzie was just waiting on his turn. Deion Colzie is a guy that loved Notre Dame, just wanted to back things up. And yet, right when he was wanting to back things up, he had a red light in terms of visits. I think Colzie's a guy where you look in terms of his eventual fit with Georgia. I don't even know if a lot of people think he'll even wind up with Georgia more.
That's interesting. Of course, Colzie, the 4-star receiver from Athens, who recently released a top 10. UGA was a part of that, and his former committed school, Notre Dame, showed up on that list there as well. So we'll do more recruiting with Jeff Sentell, and before the Hedge is presented by Kroger. I meant to say Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger tomorrow. And, of course, before the Hedge is presented by Kroger each and every Wednesday there as well. So we'll do some more with Jeff on that. Let me finish on this note. We've been looking at some big questions facing UGA as it heads toward the upcoming season, continues its preparations with those voluntary workouts. Let's expand that out now and look at some of Georgia's top competition in the SEC. Who should you be aware of? Let's do it in this fashion. Over-under's the Vegas number, the predicted win total. You can predict over more wins than that, under fewer wins than that. I thought it might be fun to get a little bit of an answer from each of our panelists about an SEC over that you like, an SEC under that you like. Mike Griffith, why don't we begin with you on the topic of an over? When you span the league here, which team, based on its projected win total, do you think is a pretty good play to go over?
They got Georgia at 10. I think I'd go over. I think it's an 11-win regular season for Georgia.
Anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I just look at the schedule and now, the Alabama-Auburn, I think that's a split, and I don't see any SEC East teams that are going to beat them. Georgia's won, I believe, 18 out of their last 19 SEC East games by double digits. And, the South Carolina game was 2 missed field goals by Rodrigo and 4 turnovers. So, that's an outlier. So I don't see anybody in the East that's going to beat Georgia. And again, Alabama-Auburn, I think that's a split. I think Alabama on the road is tough, but Alabama's defense is horrible. And their offense, because of the shortened season, I don't think will be as far along as it needs to be against the Georgia defense, whether there's fans there or not. Auburn is a little bit more dangerous opponent, but it's a home game. So I feel good about splitting for Georgia and Alabama-Auburn, 11 wins. And then under, I look to the West, and I don't think LSU's going to, they're at 9 and Mississippi State's at 6.5. I take the under on both of those.
Well, we'll swing back around that under in just a moment. Let me let me just piggyback off what you're saying about the Auburn game for Georgia. I think it's kind of an interesting point. I would suggest that even if Georgia beats Alabama, which obviously could very well happen in Tuscaloosa, Mike, I don't think that makes the Auburn game in Athens all that much easier for UGA. I think the Auburn game is still potentially a losable game, even if Georgia beats Alabama. That's the kind of game I believe if you're a UGA fan, I don't care how many years Georgia has dominated this series, and with the exception of November 2017, Georgia's had its way with Auburn for the most part the last few years. That game, for me, remains a pretty tough game, even if Georgia beats Alabama, which could very well happen.
I would agree. I was just saying that overall that the odds are that they'll beat one of those two teams.
Oh, sure. I'm just adding to your point. Connor, go ahead. What are you going to say?
BA does this every year. Yeah, he trumps up Auburn, saying Auburn, they're a tough team. You got to watch out for them. They always play Georgia tough, quote unquote. And then every year, Georgia, with the exception of 2017, Georgia finds a way to beat them. The last time Auburn, do you know the last time Auburn won in Sanford Stadium?
That would have been 2005.
Correct. I was in the sixth grade then. So it's been a while. And
I think Georgia also got jobbed by the officials late in that game too on the fumble out of the end zone.
And I think Kirby knows.
Not that I still hold a grudge.
I think similar to the way things have gone with him and Dan Mullen, I think Kirby has a very good understanding of what Gus Malzahn is going to do, how he's going to play. And I think there's sort of a comfort there. So while, yes, I understand, Auburn is traditionally a good team, I think getting them early in the season when, they might not be as developed in terms of what they are defensively, I think that could be pretty interesting.
Who's your over, Connor?
It's chalky. It's lame. I think the number I've seen for them is 10.5. Just give me Alabama over.
Yeah.
Again, I know Nick Saban is not popular in here. I know people want to bury him and he's dead. Alabama was a missed field goal away from going 11-1 in the regular season last year with an injured Tua Tagovailoa. There's still a ton of talent on this offensive side of the ball. They bring back 4 starters on the offensive line. Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle, the 2 wide receivers that have terrorized out Georgia the most in those 2 recent matchups. Those guys are both back. Najee Harris is the best running back in the SEC, and I think by the end of the year might be the best running back in the country. While Georgia might get them when they play in September, I think over the course of the season they're just going to wear teams out, and their depth is still at such an elite level that they're going to be able to withstand some of the uncertainty that goes on this offseason.
I'm going to go on the other end of the board for my answer, and I love it. Arkansas over 3.5. Very tough schedule that the Hogs play. This is a really tough schedule. They're at Notre Dame in addition to the rest of the SEC West. Yet, I think Felipe Franks, better quarterback than you think for a bad team. Not a good quarterback for a good team, but a better quarterback than you realize for a bad team. I think 2 of the real flex moves during the offseason, Sam Pittman hiring Kendall Briles as offensive coordinator, Barry Odom as defensive coordinator. Those are real live hires. You don't have to be good, but you got to find 4 wins. A couple of these, by the way, are the Louisiana Monroes, the Charleston Southerns of the world. You just need 2 more after that. As Mike alluded to a moment ago, I don't think the Mississippi schools are good this year. There's a chance for Arkansas to win in the SEC against teams like that. Hear me now, believe me later. Arkansas, Sam Pittman, over the 3.5. Take it to the bank. Jeff, do you have it over?
Don't. The bank will gladly take your money and you'll never get it back.
Over 3.5 on Arkansas.
I can't. I'm sorry. I just can't let you give our loyal Dog Nation listeners this kind of advice. I just don't recommend this.
I want this on the board. Listen, the bad teams cash just as well as the good teams do, depending on the number. Jeff, do you have a number that you like, a team that you like over in the SEC?
Yeah, I had a couple, but I got to come back to something. Obviously, I haven't had a pristine connection right here, so I'm going to ask my Dog Nation brother. I'm going to ask my Dog Nation brothers to get my back on this one. But did my man Mike Griffith say or not say that he thought Alabama's defense was going to be horrible this year?
He said is horrible. Is horrible.
So that is my shoot from the hip over, because I think if we're calling Alabama's defense horrible, I think the Crimson Tide, you still got Dylan Moses. You still got LeBron Ray. You still got a plethora of fine football players there. You guys both kind of piggybacked. I was going to check the box there for Arkansas.
You weren't going to take Arkansas.
Do you want to look at my show notes, Brandon? I've got a really, really strong feeling that Arkansas has just got to find a way to be able to beat Mississippi State and Ole Miss every year for Sam Pittman to have a long tenure there. But for the sake of variance, my other one, because we try to make sure we don't cross over the streams of opinion here, man, I like Texas A&M. I think they could go over. I don't think they're better, but I think the schedule is treating them a lot nicer this year, where they might be one of those false pretenders that everybody's looking at in November, thinking they're really something, when in actuality they're still maybe the third or fourth best team in the SEC West. I think A&M is going to go over it. Kind of happens when you drop Georgia and Clemson off the schedule. But again, folks, I think the rumors of Nick Saban and Alabama's desires, at least from my side of the world, are greatly exaggerated.
I think you can find A&M at 9.5 too, which is a pretty good number. All you need to do is go 10-2 to go over that number. I think LSU is vulnerable. I think that while I'll make a slight case for Auburn, the truth is, on paper, I think A&M is better. As Jeff said, there's no Clemson on that schedule anymore. I think that A&M, if you're looking for a bigger total to go over, the A&M total to get to like 10-2, I think is pretty interesting there. Mike, Jeff, something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to rebut Jeff there. I know his memory. He's had a lot on his mind today. He's almost upside down at times. But you got to remember, Alabama gave up 40 points in 3 quarters 2 weeks after Georgia held Auburn scoreless through 3 quarters. There is a difference. The Alabama defense was not coached well. There's not continuity there. I think Dylan Moses is more hype than reality. I've yet to see the performance match the hype. And just because people say Alabama, I don't pass out and fall over backwards, okay, like everyone else seems to. I know they've gotten the better of Georgia twice, but it wasn't because of a mighty defense. It was because of Georgia's defense faltering late. Jake Fromm and the Georgia offense had plenty of success to beat Alabama, not once, but twice. The Alabama defense is turned into a myth. It's not what it once was. Kirby Smart, when he was the defensive coordinator, they won 4 national championships over 8 years. And when he's not the defensive coordinator for Nick Saban, they've won 1 national championship in 5 years. And that's because of a breakdown in the secondary with Tua in overtime.
Mike, while you got the floor here, how about your under? I think you're about to make a case to the Mississippi schools a little earlier. Go ahead and finish that point.
Yeah, I think Mike Leach is going to be a disaster. I think he already is. I think there's probably already some buyer's regret right there. I don't think he's going to keep a quarterback upright through the season. I don't think he knows what he's in for. I look at their schedule. I think they'll lose to North Carolina State on the road early. And I think that will snowball because he is not good at crisis management. The SEC spotlight burns brightly. And I don't think the pirate jokes are going to be very funny when you're losing by 5 touchdowns. And then LSU, it's a complete reload. It's a shuffle. Look, they caught lightning in a bottle. They had a professional quarterback that never went to class for 2 years. Everybody stayed healthy. People that were in trouble with the law got legal again. It was great.
Who is that? Wait, who is that?
Well, without going into too much detail, all you got to do is Google. There was some issues there with LSU players that were suspended, that were put back on the team. I think there's going to be problems with LSU. I don't think they're going to win 10 games, and the over-under for them is 9. So I'm going to go with the under for LSU because I don't think they're going to have the same voodoo that led to that remarkable, and it was an incredible season, but I don't see it happening again for LSU this year.
Connor, you got an under?
Oh, I got an under that I love more than any over, more than you love Arkansas and the over. Give me Auburn under 8.5 wins. The schedule is a little bit more tricky than you think. They get A&M, I believe, at home. I still trust Ed Orgeron more than I think most people do. I think LSU, while they might not be a great team, I still think they're going to be a very good team. Alabama is still Alabama. Georgia, I think, as well established, is going to beat them. And then they go play North Carolina in a neutral site game in Atlanta in week 2. And the turnover on defense, new offensive coordinator in Chad Morris. North Carolina is going to be a good offensive team this year. What they are on defense, I don't know. But and granted, if you probably go back and check the tapes, I've said Auburn under for however many years. But at some point, the defense is going to falter a little bit, and that, given the offensive struggles Auburn has had in the past couple of seasons, I think is really going to make things difficult for them. And given how difficult their schedule is every year, I feel pretty good about taking them at an under 8.5.
I think UNC is a very mysterious team for this year. A chance to ruin an Auburn season and a regular season game and a potential ACC championship game against Clemson. Probably not good enough to win that game, but Sam Howell may be one of the better quarterbacks in the country. UNC could be quite a interesting team, just given the fact that Mac Brown thus far has been a little bit better than I assumed he would be at this stage of his career. My under is Tennessee at 7.5. And I'm going to go so far as to say this. I actually think there's a chance that Tennessee pulls an upset at some point in time this year. I could see them either beating an Oklahoma or a Florida, probably not both those games. And even with an upset against one of the teams that'll be favored against the Vols, I still think they may go over. Games against Kentucky, no guaranteed win here. Games against South Carolina, no guaranteed win here. Carolina's a team that I'm a little high on in comparison to the expectation of the rest of the country. This is the classic example of why the casinos get built in Nevada. Tennessee finished last season with momentum. The assumption is, well, they'll just continue to ride on where they left off at the start of the upcoming season. It's almost never that simple. Maybe a little too much too soon for the Vols a year ago. At 7.5, I feel comfortable going under on Tennessee for the upcoming season. Jeff, why don't you finish this off?
Yeah, it's funny. We do have a lot of similar thoughts here.
What would it be? We were so close.
Let's give him 1 second to see if he pops back in there. Sideways Jeff again. Jeff, you want to give this one more shot here? I can't hear him. Why don't we get ready to wrap up? We'll hear more from Jeff on Before the Hedge is presented by Kroger tomorrow. That'll be a lot of fun. This is coming off the rails fast. Connor, how about a final comment from you here?
Yeah, I think as trying and as difficult as these times are and still continue to be, I think we're continue to see positive steps towards having a college football season, and I think that'll be a really big and good thing for everyone else.
Mike, how about a final thought from you?
Yeah, I agree with Connor. I think this is headed in the right direction. I think there's a lot of momentum there. I like your under as well, BA. I'm not, a lot of momentum for Tennessee. It doesn't necessarily translate to me. They've got a lot to replace at receiver. So I think you're spot on with that under. They can't all be unders, but that one's one. So there was some great analysis today.
All right, good stuff, everybody. Thanks for being a part of the Cover 4 broadcast. Read plenty more from Mike Griffith at DogNation.com, Connor as well. I'll see you tomorrow morning, Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. Jeff Sintel will be a part of that. We'll do more of the recruiting talk with him. Jeff, you want to give us a final thought before we say goodbye here?
He wants to. Will he be able to is a better question.
Who had yes on Jeff being able to be upright
there
and have
go.
an opinion here?
There you go.
I'll say 3 quick things. Number 1, happy birthday to my lovely wife. Got to make sure you take care of the home team. She celebrates, I think, the 10th anniversary of her 25th birthday today. Hopefully I got that number low enough. I'm going to say this, guys, really fast. You've got my under. I thought it was LSU. You lose 14 players to the NFL.
Yeah.
My juicier under was Tennessee, and I'm not talking about their win total. I'm talking about their current recruiting ranking. They're currently 2. I look for them to go definitely under that. I don't think they'll be a top 10 recruiting team by the time all this is said and done. And I look forward to joining you all again on the world-famous Dog Nation Daily program tomorrow.
We'll look forward to seeing that. To all of you, thanks for being a part of the program. And, of course, happy birthday to Mrs. Sintel. And to all of you who've joined us at the Cover 4 today, we appreciate you spending some time with us here this afternoon. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you back again very soon for another edition of the Cover 4 broadcast. For Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, and Mike Griffith, I'm Brandon Adams saying thanks for being with us. Have a great day, everybody.